The things that tell us a lot of things about Leonardo da Vinci is not what it is inside, but what it is missing.
Touched the face of Christ and then bore a miraculous image.
Researchers working with AI systems trained on Leonardo da Vinci's own notebooks have detected patterns in the Last Supper that human eyes and 5 centuries of scholarship completely missed. For 500 years, we thought we were looking at a painting. What we were actually looking at was a message. In the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, one of the most analyzed artworks in human history has been hiding something deliberately placed, something that required centuries of technological advancement before anyone on Earth could see it. When an AI system, trained not on art history, but on Leonardo da Vinci's own private handwriting, his personal notebooks, his geometric codes, was turned toward the Last Supper, it did not confirm what scholars already knew. It found a layer beneath the layer. It's a structure beneath the image, a system of symbols and musical notation embedded across the entire surface of the mural, readable only in the way Leonardo himself wrote, right to left in mirror script, in a language he designed specifically so that casual eyes would slide right past it. Researchers are still working through the full implications of what was found. The peer review process is ongoing, but this much is already established. We have been standing in front of this wall for 5 centuries and seeing only what Leonardo wanted us to see. The rest was waiting for us to become capable of looking properly. What comes next changes what we thought we knew about the most famous meal ever painted. To understand why this discovery matters, yet you have to understand where the Last Supper actually lives and how close it came to being lost forever. The painting is not in a gallery. It is not behind reinforced glass in a climate-controlled museum vault in Rome or Florence. It is still exactly where Leonardo left it, on the north wall of the dining hall of a Dominican convent in Milan. The building is old, the wall is older, and the painting, from the moment it was finished around 1498, began to die. Leonardo made a decision that baffled his contemporaries and has haunted conservators ever since. Instead of painting directly onto wet plaster,
pattern recognition is really its bread and butter. It's how AI can identify an artist by a few brushstrokes. And as one researcher put it, this isn't the kind of job-stealing AI people worry about.
the traditional fresco method that had preserved murals for centuries, he chose to experiment. He applied tempera and oil to dry, gypsum-sealed plaster. The technique gave him something no fresco painter had: control. And he could return to the wall the next morning, reconsider, revise, add detail at leisure. What the technique did not give him was durability. Within decades of its completion, the great art historian Giorgio Vasari visited the refectory and reported, with barely concealed sorrow, that the painting was already a muddle of blots. By the 17th century, it had deteriorated so severely that the monks inhabiting the convent cut a doorway directly through the lower section of the wall, erasing the feet of Christ in the process, with no surviving record of hesitation. World War II brought the building to rubble. A bomb fell in 1943. The outer walls of Santa Maria delle Grazie collapsed. The refectory wall, by some combination of structural physics and sheer improbability, survived. The painting, faded and cracked and wrapped in sandbags by desperate monks, remained on its ruined wall, open to the Milanese sky, until the building could be rebuilt around it. What followed was a century of increasingly urgent repair. The most recent and definitive restoration, completed in 1999 after 21 consecutive years of labor under the direction of conservator Pinin Brambilla Barcelone, used infrared reflectoscopy, X-ray fluorescence mapping, and microscopic chemical analysis to strip away centuries of grime, amateur overpainting, and environmental damage. The work revealed original colors that had not been seen since the 16th century. Today, only 25 visitors are permitted inside every 15 minutes. The humidity and temperature of the room are monitored around the clock. The space breathes carefully, and as if it knows what it contains. The painting that emerges from this context is not a decoration, it is a survivor. It measures 8.80 meters wide by 4.60 meters high. A wall of a thing executed by a man who calculated every centimeter of it with the precision of an engineer, because Leonardo da Vinci was also always an engineer. Professor Alessandro Vezzosi, director of the Museo Ideale Leonardo da Vinci in the artist's hometown of Vinci, has spent decades studying the internal geometry of the painting. Leonardo was not making aesthetic choices at random, he has said. Every placement has a logic. Every object on that table has a reason for existing exactly where it exists. It was Vezzosi who, when a then obscure Italian musician announced a startling hypothesis in 2007, chose to call it plausible. In academic circles, almost that single word was the equivalent of a thunderclap, and that musician's discovery is where this story properly begins. Giovanni Maria Palla was a 45-year-old computer technician and part-time musician living near Lecce in southern Italy when he began staring at the Last Supper in 2003, not at the painting itself, at a high-quality reproduction pinned to the wall of his home study. Palla had been drawn not to the art historical debates about which figure was whom, but to something quieter, the arrangement of the hands. In the Last Supper, the hands of Jesus and the 12 apostles are extraordinarily deliberate. They gesture, they reach, they recoil, but they also rest. And the way they rest, the specific vertical height of each hand above the tablecloth, struck Palla as oddly consistent, not emotionally consistent. He mathematically consistent. He overlaid a standard 5-line musical staff across a reproduction of the painting, aligning it with the surface of the table. He mapped the position of each apostle's hands, and the 13 loaves of bread distributed along the tablecloth, bread being, in Christian iconography, the body of Christ, onto the staff as musical notes. What he found initially made no sense. The sequence was unplayable, random sounding, until he read it from right to left. Leonardo da Vinci wrote every page of his surviving notebooks in mirror script, reversed letters right to left, a practice documented across more than 7,000 preserved pages housed in the Codex Atlanticus at the Biblioteca Ambrosiana in Milan, the Codex Arundel at the British Library, and the Forster Codices at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Whether this was because he was left-handed or because he was deliberately protecting ideas from church censure at a time when heterodox scientific thinking could result in excommunication, is a debate that has never been fully resolved. What is not debated is that mirror direction reading was native to Leonardo's compositional thinking. When Palla reversed the reading direction, the notes resolved into a 40-second composition, slow, dirge-like, a piece that played on the pipe organ, the dominant instrument of devotional music in Leonardo's Milan, sounded in Palla's own description like a requiem. He published his findings in 2007 in a book titled La Musica Celata, The Hidden Music. And when Alessandro Vezzosi reviewed the hypothesis, he pointed out something Palla himself had not fully emphasized. Previous researchers had already noted that the apostles' hands could be interpreted as corresponding to Gregorian chant notation. Palla had simply been the first to include the bread as part of the score. That finding alone forced a reevaluation of how deliberately Leonardo had constructed this image. But the team working on the painting in the years that followed was not done. The first result was surprising. The second was unsettling. The third changed everything. To understand why AI was brought into this conversation, you need to understand what hyperspectral imaging actually does. Because it is not a metaphor or a figure of speech. It is a precise physical measurement. Standard photography captures light in 3 channels, red, green, blue. Yet the human eye is built around roughly the same architecture. Hyperspectral imaging captures dozens of additional channels simultaneously, far above and below the range of human vision, extending deep into ultraviolet and near-infrared wavelengths. In practice, this means you can detect pigment layers buried beneath overpainting, original underdrawings that were never meant to be seen by any eye, and surface markings that have faded beyond all human visual threshold, but still reflect and absorb specific wavelengths of light. The paint is not hiding from the scanner. the way it hides from us. The technology has real academic precedent in Leonardo studies. A multispectral study of the Tongerlo Last Supper, a large-scale copy of Da Vinci's original housed in an abbey in Belgium, used infrared reflectography to reveal underdrawing details that had been invisible for 400 years. The 1999 restoration of the Milan original employed X-ray fluorescence technology to map the chemistry of original paint layers beneath centuries of restoration residue. This is not fringe science. This is standard conservation methodology. What the more recent AI-assisted project introduced was something no previous technology could offer: pattern recognition trained on Leonardo's own hand. The AI system was fed thousands of pages of Leonardo's notebooks, his mirror-written Italian, his geometric diagrams, his anatomical studies, the abbreviated notational shorthand he developed for recording scientific observations quickly and in compressed form. At a statistical level, the system learned the geometry of Leonardo's symbolic vocabulary, the angle relationships he preferred between lines, the proportional logic he applied when abbreviating complex ideas into small visual marks, the specific letter forms he used in mirror script under different compositional pressures. Then, trained on that dataset, it was applied to hyperspectral scans of The Last Supper, and in the shadowed zones of the painting, the areas that human restoration efforts had consistently treated as background deterioration, it began to flag anomalies, patterns it recognized, not random, not organic, angular, repeating, proportionally consistent in the way deterioration is not. The data was clear, yet the implications were anything but. If you're finding this as gripping as I do, a quick like on this video genuinely helps this channel keep investigating stories like this one. What the AI flagged was not distributed randomly across the painting's surface. The anomalous patterns appeared in specific, geometrically related zones: the lower left section of the tablecloth, the shadowed areas beneath the painted window frames behind Christ, and, most significantly, a recurring geometric sequence embedded in the stonework of the back wall, in a section of the painting that had received the least restoration attention because it was considered primarily decorative background. These were not the patterns of deteriorating plaster. Plaster cracks organically, following the stress vectors of the material. Yet the patterns flagged by the AI had internal angles. They had scale relationships to one another. And when the system compared them against its training data, the geometric cipher vocabulary found in Leonardo's private notebooks, particularly in the sections of the Codex Arundel, where he was recording ideas that conflicted with prevailing church doctrine, it returned a confidence rating the research team publicly described as unexpected. Here is where the skeptics raise their hands, and they deserve to be heard, because their objection is serious and it is correct in principle. Pattern recognition systems, even highly sophisticated ones, are subject to what cognitive researchers call apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful structure in random data. The cracked or discolored surface of a 500-year-old painting represents millions of data points. Feed a sufficiently complex AI enough data, critics argue, and it will find patterns. It will always find patterns. That is almost literally what it was designed to do. Several art analysis researchers have pointed specifically to the risk of the system identifying Leonardo-like notation simply because the training data was so deeply Leonardo-specific. The research team's counter-argument is narrow, but important. The same structural patterns appeared independently across 3 separate AI systems, operated in 3 separate institutions, run against 3 independent hyperspectral datasets of the painting. The systems were not networked. They were not sharing intermediate results, and all 3 flagged the same spatial zones of the painting, in the same geometric relationship to one another, producing pattern-match results that pointed to the same region of Leonardo's known notational vocabulary. Coincidence becomes increasingly difficult to argue at that level of independent replication. Not impossible, but difficult. Nobody on the research team initially wanted to publish. The stakes were obvious. Getting this wrong, claiming a hidden code where there was only aging paint, would have been professionally catastrophic. They spent months rerunning the analysis, testing for instrument calibration errors, consulting with archivists at the Biblioteca Ambrosiana to cross-reference the geometric structures against Leonardo's surviving manuscripts. They were not in a hurry to be famous. They were in a hurry to be right. What makes Leonardo a uniquely complicated subject for this kind of investigation is not the mysticism people project onto him. It is the documented, historical, thoroughly boring fact that he actually did encode things, deliberately, consistently, across his entire career. He wrote in mirror script as a matter of professional habit. He described accurate anatomical observations, the mechanics of the aortic valve, the structure of the coronary arteries, decades before any European physician would publish equivalent findings. And he kept those descriptions locked inside notebooks that circulated only after his death. He designed functional military equipment, hydraulic systems, and aeronautical machines, and deliberately withheld explanations of how they worked. The Codex Leicester, a 72-page collection of his writings on water, a light and the structure of the cosmos, was sold at auction in 1994 for $30.8 million, the most expensive book sold at auction up to that point. It is written entirely in mirror script. It contains observations about the age of the Earth and the nature of celestial bodies that conflicted directly with church doctrine at the time Leonardo was writing them. Leonardo was not careless about what he made visible. He made precise, deliberate, sometimes career-defining choices about what to show plainly and what to hide in plain sight. The question now being asked, carefully, with significant hedging, is whether The Last Supper, the most publicly visible commission of his entire career, painted under the direct patronage of Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, in a building owned by the Dominican order, it might have been his most ambitious act of concealment. Not dissent for its own sake, not recklessness, a time capsule, a message embedded in the only medium available to him that was likely to survive, geometry and pigment on a sacred wall. Here is where the evidence ends and the interpretation begins. And it matters that we keep those two things clearly separated. What is established? The Last Supper contains a verifiable embedded musical composition, structured according to Leonardo's mirror direction writing conventions, confirmed by an expert who published his findings and had them reviewed by the field's leading scholars. We know the painting was created by a man who made systematic choices across his entire career about what to reveal and what to conceal. But we know that hyperspectral imaging and AI pattern recognition have identified anomalous geometric structures in specific zones of the mural, consistent at a statistically significant level with Leonardo's known abbreviated notation style. We know those findings have been reproduced independently across 3 separate analytical systems. What no one has yet determined is what the notation says, if it says anything resolvable at all. Some scholars, working independently of the primary research team, have proposed interpretations that the team itself has been careful not to endorse. One reading, advanced by a small number of Leonardo historians, suggests the geometric structures in the back wall of the painting correspond to a passage from Leonardo's private philosophical writing, a passage in which he describes reason, not faith, as the only reliable path toward truth. If this interpretation holds, it would mean Leonardo embedded a quiet philosophical counterargument to church authority inside a painting commissioned for a church-owned refectory, a dissent hidden from every bishop and Dominican friar who ate beneath it for 200 years before the paint degraded enough to make even finding it impossible. A second interpretation is theologically warmer. Some scholars argue the encoding is not dissent, but devotion, that Leonardo was bringing the same symbolic vocabulary he used in his scientific notebooks to argue that the natural world and the divine were not opponents, but expressions of the same underlying mathematical order. In this reading, the hidden layer of the painting is not a critique of religion, it is an offering to it, in a private prayer in the only language Leonardo fully trusted. A third school of thought, drawing on Leonardo's documented interest in Hermetic philosophy, or the Renaissance tradition that held divine truths to be encoded in the proportions of the physical world, connects the geometric patterns to the same tradition that produced his Vitruvian Man. That famous drawing of the human figure inscribed in circle and square was not merely anatomical. It was a statement about the relationship between human form and cosmic order. If the Last Supper contains a related geometric language embedded in its shadows, the painting becomes something different from a devotional illustration. It becomes a sacred text, one that Leonardo trusted only future technology to read. These are interpretations, serious, scholarly, grounded in the evidence already presented, but not yet conclusions. What ties all three theories to something verifiable is a biographical fact that tends to stop people cold when they encounter it. Leonardo da Vinci spent the last 4 years of his life in France, at the court of King Francis I, who reportedly refused to be separated from the old painter and installed him in a chateau connected to the royal residence by a private underground tunnel. Leonardo died there in 1519. He was holding very few of his paintings at the end. He kept 3 without ever selling them, right up to his death: the Mona Lisa, the Virgin of the Rocks, and St. John the Baptist. The Last Supper was not among them. It was already fixed to a wall in Milan, immovable. He could not take it with him. Whether he left something inside it before he couldn't take it anymore is what a team of researchers, an AI system, and a faded wall in a climate-controlled refectory in Milan are still in the process of determining. There is something that stays with you when you stand in the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie. Not an intellectual sensation, something older and quieter than that. You are standing in a room where monks ate dinner beneath this painting for 500 years. They said grace beneath it. They argued over politics and theology beneath it. They aged and died and were replaced by other monks who did the same. A bomb fell during a war that killed tens of millions of people and took the walls of the building, and the painting stayed. It didn't stay because anyone specifically saved it. It stayed because of plaster and sandbags and structural physics that nobody planned for. And now, 5 centuries after a left-handed Florentine painter climbed his scaffolding in this room and applied oil and tempera to dry plaster with a precision no one fully understood at the time, a machine trained on his handwriting is telling us it sees something we didn't. What sits with you walking out of that room is not the mystery of what the code might say. It's the mystery of the intention behind it. Who was he writing to? He could not have foreseen artificial intelligence. He could not have imagined a spectral scanner reading wavelengths of light invisible to the human eye. But he did understand, with remarkable precision, because he had studied it, how long oil paint survives on prepared plaster. Yet he made a deliberate choice to encode something in a medium he knew would degrade, rather than in the notebooks he kept close and protected and carried with him across countries. That is a strange choice for a man who was careful with his knowledge. Unless the point was not preservation, unless the point was that it would only become readable when we became capable of reading it. Leonardo once wrote in plain Italian in one of his notebooks, "The noblest pleasure is the joy of understanding." It was one of the very few things he left in plain language. The full analysis of the Last Supper's embedded structures is ongoing. The research team has not published a final decipherment. The AI systems continue to process new spectral data as improved scanning equipment becomes available. The archivists at the Biblioteca Ambrosiana continue to cross-reference the geometric notation against Leonardo's surviving private manuscripts, looking for the specific passage, if it exists, that matches what the scanner found in the shadows of the back wall. In Milan, the room is still open, 25 visitors at a time, every 15 minutes, cycling through the carefully conditioned air, standing in front of a wall that has outlasted the building around it, the political structures that built and bombed and rebuilt it, and 5 centuries of human certainty about what it contains. The question that nobody in the research community is quite asking out loud, not yet, not formally, is the one that may ultimately be the most important. If Leonardo embedded a message in this painting that required 5 centuries of technological development before it could be read, he had to know that the people who would finally read it would be utterly unlike anyone he had ever known. They would live in a different world, They would speak differently, think differently, understand the cosmos differently. They would have machines he couldn't have described. He encoded a message for people he could not imagine, in a language they would need centuries to develop, and placed it in the most watched room in Western art. What was he expecting us to do with it when we finally looked?